Thank you very much, and really appreciate the time. I feel honored to present to the university faculties, as well as I guess some students also would have joined, and welcome Anil also, who introduced me to this. So let me start by sharing my screen. We have two things to discuss today. One was definitely, as per the introduction you had given me, design thinking for the digital era. And we'll try to get it aligned with the industrial IoT as close as possible. They were considered as very different subjects, but I think in the future this is going to evolve into something which needs to be going hand in hand or working hand in hand. So I thought it's important that we understand both sides of the story. One is the design thinking, and the other aspect would be the industrial IoT. So that's kind of summarizes what I do. I provide, and thanks for the nice introduction. But as a summary, I think I'm focusing more and more to look at providing technical solutions with a very human-centric approach to problems. And that's what I think defines design thinking. And given the depth and breadth of the technical knowledge you gain over a period of time in working in industry, especially in the telecom industry, with the companies that you mentioned and the Asia Pacific region, I got a lot of exposure in the telecom industry. But recently, my course on design thinking gave me a lot more aspects to how I could really resolve user problems, customer problems, and how I can bring about innovation. Because I think the world is changing. The digital era is very dynamic. And I'm sure I think you are understanding where the technology is growing, but it's also important that we innovate things in the right way, in the right methodology. I think that's where design thinking is leading us into. As was introduced, I've done several projects around this area, but more recently, I think I'm providing some independent technical advisory roles for a few companies, and also evaluated few tools to help with the IoT aspects as well as engineering industrial IoT aspects, right? So it's a interesting learning for me coming from the telecommunication world on how engineering world is shifting towards the digital movement and what kind of changes that would bring in the industry itself, right? That's what I think I'm going to share with you, my views, my thoughts, and my ideas on how this could actually bring about the change. I'm very happy to make it as collaborative the discussion as possible with questions, and we'll discuss more in the end also some of the prospective future thinking. So as an agenda, part one is mainly design thinking. I'm not very sure how many of you have heard about this term or what it actually is and how you define it. I will also try to see how relevant it is to the engineering world, hopefully at the end of this session. And I've shared with you some, it's kind of vast subject, but I'm sharing with you some methodology and use cases to prove the point on how people have actually used design thinking and build solutions around it, right? And the second part will be on the IIoT, industrial IoT. And we will talk about largely around connectivity and the challenges around the connectivity that's looming around. So me coming from the telecom world, I thought that would be a very good piece of information to share with you. And what's also happening along with the connectivity is, IIoT is going to lead into a huge amount of usage of devices, data, and the connectivity. So it's not something that you can just organically scale. You need to really carefully plan it ahead. And that's where cloud and the edge architectures come into play. So we will see how all these three items tie together. I kind of call it as a creativity, communication, and cloud, right? That's how I see all the three C's coming together here. Talking about design thinking, it's not something very new. It's been there for a very long time, just that it's probably not as widely used as per what it is planned to be used today, right? But you would see aspects of design thinking in every innovation, right? It's obviously has been there. I'll share some examples as we progress. But more importantly, I think Gordon and Osborne probably first time created book, or wrote a book at least, for methods of creativity. So that was widely accepted, and people started thinking. And same time, there was in the industry, there was something called as a wicked problem being evolved, which is they call this as a wicked problem because you really don't know whether it's a right thing to do or wrong thing to do, right? It could be large problems of global, of people, emotions, and many things, but you can't really quantify them as right or wrong. So these are called as wicked problems, very tough and complex, open-ended problem statements. So that's where design thinking came into play, on how do you really understand the problem statement and how do you define it very well, and is it even important to work on it, right? You also make a decision whether you really need to work on a problem or not. So these are some of the evolutionary aspects of it. Obviously, in 1990 probably was, as highlighted there, was the first time David Kelly started an organization, design consulting organization. And this became largely used in the market. And courses started coming up, with Stanford leading it in 2005, and now you have plenty of them. I personally did a course with MIT and Sloan Education. It was an online education, and opened up a lot of ideas on how this actually works. And right now, every business and new innovations of service and products are using and effectively trying to see how design thinking can help, right? So I'll give you some case studies, but to start with Tim Brown, who continued, who's now the CEO of IDEO, which was started by David Kelly. He quotes something very interesting in his, you can view it in YouTube. This is a pretty interesting, I think it's part of the TED case study, he shared this. He said design thinking was always there. For example, Brunel was a designer and architect, who were asked to build the Great Western Railways. And his thought was, let me not just try thinking of building a railways and a railroad, but actually he wants to create a journey experience for his passengers, right? Which is like almost like floating across the countryside, a different experience in the train. So he selected the locations and the places accordingly. So it's to enhance the experience of your travel, right? Which in the 19th century means really building bridges and viaducts across river valleys and tunnels and so on. So it was a complex, but he thought the priority was to create a journey experience just long. And he just didn't stop with that. It was already a complex project, but he also extended that to the Great Western Railway, where he started. We started looking at transporting them to the experience from getting into London and from a train, and then disembarking and getting on a ship to New York. So the SS Great Western, took the second half. So it kind of extended the whole philosophy of experience and how they should seamlessly move from the train to ship. And the whole process was something he thought way back in when this even started. The locomotive industry even was starting. So I think probably that was one start. He also quotes Edison in the way he thinks about innovations, and he said design thinking was probably relevant even those days, just that it was not defined, right? So what is actually design thinking? What is being defined right now, or what I call as a widely accepted view today, right? More popular and widely accepted view today, is that it's something which is human desirable, where really there is a need and a want to have that kind of experience, right? It's a human desirable experience that you get, but in combination with business viability. Is it viable to build something like that, or even to sustain a project something like that, is something that design thinking tries to focus on. And of course, I put it last categorically, the technically feasibility part of it, because what happens is we all come from a very logical thinking, engineering mindset, and we quickly jump into solutions, right? And so technical feasibility is the first thing we look at. So probably this changes the mindset a bit. Technical feasibility has to be looked at from the other two angles also, from the human desire as well as the business viability, right? And as we progress, hopefully you will be able to appreciate. And that sweet spot is where the design thinking tries to define it. And the standard definition would be to give a human-centered approach to innovation and to integrate the needs of the people with the possibilities of technology. And when I say possibilities of technology, it even means innovation or creating new, if it helps the people, right? Creating new ideas and not just reusing existing technology. And also the requirements for business success. So it has to be really viable. If you do these two, automatically there's a business success that you see. And that's what some of the great examples have shown. So I'm going to share with you a couple of interesting case studies to go with this. I call it as a common IT guy story, right? If you remember the traditional laptops, or even now, but we had a big problem when people trip off from the power connectors, and that effectively destroys the whole laptop, because that power connector feeds into the processor, and the processor doesn't start if the motherboard doesn't start, if that power is disturbed, right? And I've personally lost my data in 2002s, right? It's really a painful experience. But no vendor really bothered about it or asked about this particular problem, like how do you really fix this issue? Because people keep tripping because you connect the power cord all over the office or the home environment, and it's very likely to have that kind of an accident. So they thought there's an external problem. They didn't really want to fix it. But it could have been an important decision point for someone like me who thought that I lost a lot of data just because of this problem. And if the vendors had looked at this aspect, that would have been my better decision point for my next purchase, right? And that's what one of the companies did, which later I realized when I purchased one of the Apple products, MacBook, and I realized there was a different kind of an adapter. They called it as a MagSafe adapter. It was actually a magnetic connector. If you look at it, there are different ways in which you connect that the pins. And Apple generally is known for design thinking. I'm not sure if they quote this particular example for design thinking, but I can see that this example really defines how the company thinks about customers. For example, this is not something they've already patented this now as a MagSafe, but it's not something that innovation that they created. This magnetic way of connecting was already used in the Japanese deep fryer, but it was used for appliances for safety reasons, right? So that if there is a hot spillover, it automatically disconnects and you don't have a power cut and things like that. So it was leveraged with that. But what's more important is there is a new philosophy coming here, what I call it as, or I define it as a latent need, right? I'll slowly try to introduce the terminologies which are used in design thinking with these examples. One is obviously the ideation aspect of it or the inspiration aspect of it, that they got it. But what they also saw was this particular requirement was not customers defined saying, I want this in my laptop. I want a magnetic connector in my laptop. They don't define it like that. You will say, I want a powerful computer. I want it to last long. I want it to be as safe as possible and things like that. But they don't necessarily say, I want a requirement says, I want a MagSafe adapter. But this is a company which understood that this is not an explicitly asked requirement, but these are some of the real problems which customers are facing, and this will enhance the experience of using this particular tool or the product, right? That's what I call as a latent need, and that's very important. And a lot of emphasis is given in design thinking for the latent need, and more importantly, I think now they have discontinued it. Not that I'm not too happy with, not too happy or not happy with that, but they have. Look at an iterative model. That means they have got new feedbacks. The industry is moving towards USB-C and for greater benefits of common adapter framework and things like that. So there is an iteration with new feedbacks, and they're evolving. I think that's what I think every company or a R&D team or a product development team should look at, right? How do you constantly evolve? That iteration is very key. So you have the ideation, you have the latent needs, and then you have the iteration, which becomes very key. And that's what I call it as human desirable, not explicitly asked, but highly desired by people who are using it, right? Now, next comes to a very, another interesting case study, close to my heart. I love coffee. I especially love filter coffee, if it is with milk. If it is not, I love this espressos. And this is a company called Nespresso. I'm not sure if you have heard of it or if it's popular. That'll be similar tools, but they have been there for many years. One of the pioneers who started this. Their vision was to have a high quality coffee with the speed and ease of an instant. That means very instantly you can build it. Now, this just didn't start as a company with some business idea, right? It is so Eric in 75. It goes as late as that, right? In 1975, he used to visit his favorite barista. There used to be a long line, but and it was intriguing for him as to why people like this so much, or why do he himself like this so much, right? So we normally just drink or eat and come back in our favorite restaurants, but he went and tried a bit of research and understood that they do pump repeatedly, forcing more water and making the ground beans more oxidated that way to give the right flavor and things like that. So I think there is a process that he understood. And what he did is he just didn't start another barista to do that, right? For him, his vision was much, much deeper. He said, I want to have this, not people stand in a line, but I want to have this experience at home. And even just walking out of their bed in the morning, they should have a coffee as good as this, right? So that kind of a vision created this instant design. Now it's hugely popular. But what's also important is the brand itself was not recognized in places like US because they are not using to having a small espresso shot. They like the large scale, coffee mugs. And he wanted to change the style. So obviously they did some good digital marketing in that. They got the famous Clooney to post just one post, and that one post changed the whole game for them. They became a big brand there. But that's not about design thinking, but just to share that he knows how to address different markets differently. But more importantly, I think there is also the society factor. I think both Apple and Nespresso are, if you watch any of their videos or presentations, they always talk about how to lower the footprint, right? The carbon impact of the carbon footprint, and the eco-friendly nature of whatever they invent, they create, they use, and how do they go about doing it. There were practical challenges. Even the design of those pods, right? The kind of aluminum foil they use. There were a lot of questions being asked on why it is used, how it's being used, and it was important because they were trying to ship it across the globe, so they wanted to make it lighter. So I think that's where I think they were very innovative in it. But they created something very technically feasible with that. Where it goes is there's an important element here called empathizing with the customer, with your user, right? And observe. Henry Ford famously said, right, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? So that's how requirements go, right? But most of the time customers can't express it. They can't really innovate it for you, right? So it's very important that when you innovate, you observe, or you keep people around you. You observe while you empathize, while you ask questions, while you empathize, you go about building that. I think that's a very important aspect. Now, something close to our homes, and I hope you have heard of Arvind, the eye care system. A great organization. They define the problem differently. They are the largest provider of eye care, and they have been serving patients all across the country, and surgeries too. But where it all started is, they wanted to eradicate blindness, right, in the Indian rural population specifically. And they wanted to give good ophthalmic care, right? They created, there are a lot of challenges, right? Poverty is a challenge. So you can't really kind of provide the same solution in rural areas. And he knew that he had to bring down the cost from $400 to $4, right? Or even less than that, right? In fact, it is free in some demographics, I heard, based on the previous models, right? So it's a very extensive, highly innovative solutions and tools, diagnostic tools they got. They got satellite-linked telemedicine truck to remote areas. We talk about edge computing today, but they did it a couple of years ago, bringing the whole technology close to the end user, and they have been very successful with it. So something very proud and close to my heart, and how they have achieved some solution, right? They made it. They covered everything. They have done technical feasibility. They have done human need in a very special way, but also more importantly, business viable, because that's something which is very different to achieve in a rural Indian aspect, right? So it's just highly business viable, right? The drive itself was not business. The drive itself was very different. So I was really very special to do that. Now, so that's how I think design thinking. When you go and search and Google on what is design thinking, you get into these aspects, right? How you empathize, you define a problem, then how do you ideate and create solutions, and more importantly, you need to prototype it, and effectively with every prototype you check whether it is viable, and so on. But my one addition to this, right, my personal addition to this is you need to also change your thought process, right? So let me give you a cheat sheet of how this works, right? The key design principles behind these is first, in my view, is a thought process, right? I'm inspired by one of a lady called Kiran, who started this process in India called design, change by design. I've passed it at the last slide, some more information. But I got the inspiration from her, and this is what I quote, saying, don't innovate for the sake of technology. Don't innovate to differentiate, innovate to make a difference to someone. The reason is, a lot of products in the market are there being innovated, but they don't really see the value in the market eventually. They all kind of die down very quickly, right? In the lack of, so I call this as a famous problem of having a technology and a solution and then looking for a problem, right? It's very difficult to then convince people. It is very difficult to sell. It takes a lot of time and energy drains you in doing that, right? But when you start with this different thought process, innovate to make a difference to someone, I think like the Arvind Aikar, I think you really innovate. You think beyond and you extend the technology. That's the best part of it. You don't really use the technology, you will extend beyond that. So I've personally used many of this, or I'm continuing to build a lot more on that. In the exploration part of it, I think that's where you get inspired, like the barista, right? You get inspired, look out for problems, like the Arvind Aikar. Form a diverse team, very important. You need to have diverse views. You can't go with a predefined and prejudiced mindset. Do a lot of research on how people use it, what is the behavioral changes that they need to go through, collect a lot of data and statistics around it. But more importantly, watch out for the unsaid. That's where the later needs come up, right? Defining the later needs, right? You can get this only with the very empathetic interviews and observations. Believe me, there's a very strong emphasis on this empathy part of it. You really need to empathize and ask and probe a lot of questions, and there are tools which will help you with that, but which I'll share again in the next few slides. But more importantly, I think that's very key, and an observation is very key. And there are a lot of tools for ideation, prototyping. You're in the engineering world, you know it very well. Brainstorming, feedback, constant feedback analysis, then you down select different ideas, prototype, very importantly, prototype them. There's a prototype aspect of it. I think in the industrial IoT, I'll come to it on how that's going to slightly change from how we do it in the how it's going to change in the future, or I hope it changes in the future. But you really have to prototype. Whichever tool you use, you have to prototype, test it, and don't forget to adopt earth-friendly strategies, right? Very eco-friendly strategies, because that's something no one tells you or asks you to do, but that's something that you need to do as a responsible citizen of the world, right? And more importantly, build a minimum viable product. That's where you understand whether it is business feasible, and implement a smaller scale, get the feedback, and then roll it out with more and more ideas. So you create a framework always, so that framework can be extended for future. Don't just try to look at a big product to be built always, right? So we call it as a minimum viable product in the industry. So you guys should know it. So we'll not have too much time into this. It's quite a huge subject by itself. But when I share the information, I want you to just understand that there is a big process behind it. It is, it's a course I did for 3 months. I'm trying to summarize in 25 minutes. But more importantly, there's a larger process that goes behind how you do all this thing. And there is also a tool, right? You can creatively use any tool. There is no force on how you do it, as long as you follow the process, entirely. But, there are different tools I've used. For example, customer journey management, I use empathy map. I use, there are some examples. Then there is also questions like ask 5 times why questions, right? you keep asking, right? You can even ask your child or friend, if they ask you something, you ask them why 5 times, you get to know the real problem. The child might say, first I want the chocolate. You will say, why? They'll say hungry. Then they'll say, no, because I just saw an ad where I saw something, right? Or they might just they don't know what else to do, so they want to eat. So you keep asking. It drives into the real needs and the problems, right? And you create personas, you create stakeholders map, you have brainstorming and prototyping, testing, and so on. So there are a lot of tools here. There is also this nice tool, how you define a particular problem statement. This is something I popularly use. It's how can we develop or create something, right? Invent or develop or create something for someone, right? For a person or for a society, in order to solve the problem, right? So this helps you really streamline. Once you have a problem and you try to put it in these words, it helps you understand the problem much better, right? I've also used personas before I do interviews and empathy maps. And this is one example of empathy map that I did, where in that persona, I try to understand what do they think and feel. I say, what do they see when they use a particular tool, and what do they hear? What do they say and do? So there are different ways in which you can word your questions before you create this empathy map, right? These are the questions which will allow you to create some kind of an empathy. And when you question, right, like I ask them, what do your competitors, what do your users say when they use this particular part of the website? What do the users think and feel when they click? They have to click and write a survey for 3-4 pages, right? So it actually triggers a lot of questions and solutions and ideas, and then you classify or summarize that into the pain and the gain, and then present it to the stakeholders. So empathy map is a very useful tool. You can follow the similar template, and you get a lot on the internet, empathy map templates. You could do that. I specifically used a company called Mural. They're very good in design thinking and journey templates. I use them for some of this. There is also a new idea called divergent and convergent thinking. This very, very, very proven technique. I heard. I've not personally used it much, but it's very proven. But it's part of the process, actually. Like you first go around, discover in a very divergent way. Different people go, and then diverse views, and then you come back and converge and define the problem together. Like how you define this problem, you converge and define together. Again, once you define the problem, you go and develop solutions. And even in the problem, you diverge the architecture by different ideas, right? And then again come back and create solutions again together. So there is a very intuitive or interesting methodology used here. For example, once people define a particular problem statement, they don't know how to down select, right? So what do? Is they just write something weird on a whiteboard, for example, rainbow, or cloud, or something like that, and then people start writing down this totally irrelevant subject to what they are defining a problem. Let's say they're defining railways. They'll suddenly write something called cloud, and they'll start writing thoughts around clouds. And when they start, different people write the thoughts around clouds, they suddenly see there is actually similarity between the problem statement and that cloud related small workshop that they did, because it is somewhere subconsciously in their mind, the problem statements evolve into something else, or they express themselves very differently. So there's a lot of psychology behind this divergent and convergent thinking. It's a very interesting exercise. If you're interested, you can do more research on it. But just to help this particular statement, and going back to our eye care, I kind of help you write that how can we statement, right? So for example, that could be defined as how can we provide a superior eye care with a cost-effective solution for the poor in rural India in order to solve or eradicate the blindness, right? So it might not have been defined this way, right? It might be a problem that they've seen, but then slowly, once you look at all these aspects, then you start looking at how do you take aspects of this and make it bigger and try to solve the problem. Now, why I'm saying this, and the first statement and the last example about the railways, and this is that always think big. I think that's what Tim Brown says. When you have a problem in hand, think big. Don't just look at, think collaboration. He calls shift to local, collaborative, participatory design thing. That means you need to really collaborate, look at all the aspects of what is happening in and around you, make it more participatory, and you try to solve a bigger problem, right? Then larger societal problems. I think that's where design thinking is moving into. Obviously, in business, they are trying to adopt it because this is proven to be useful. Design thinking is not about not just about solving problems. It's also about innovating in the sense that it can also help you qualify. So a lot of businesses are even trying to see that I have this idea, should I even build on it or not? So they use design thinking to actually confirm that idea that you should not actually go and building it, right? Because of the feasibility aspects that you see there, right? So that Kiranbir Sethi, you can have a look at her in YouTube. I was personally inspired the kind of thing she's bringing to the, and this has been happening for many years ago, and it's expanding globally. This is a phenomenon which is now adopted globally across the globe, and she's invited to talk about how she has changed Indian education system, where so things like that. Also, again, rural and places where education can't reach, she has gone and changed that, especially for the kids, right? Not in the higher education, but more in the kids area. IDEO and some useful references that you can actually look for more information on design thinking if you think that is useful for you. Yeah. So I'll stop my design thinking play here. We will move on to IoT. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take it now, or if you want to leave it to the later, we can, in the interest of time, we can finish and then we can take the question later.